Hello and welcome to another standard video here in the preview event for Tarkir Dragonstorm, so thanks to Wizards for having me, and my supporters on Patreon voted that I should check out Mardu Siegebreaker first, a 4-mana 4/4 with Death Touch and Haste. When it enters, we can exile up to one other creature we control until the Siegebreaker leaves the battlefield, so the wording here is very important. If the Siegebreaker ends up getting exiled or bounced, we'll still get that exiled creature back, and whenever the Siegebreaker attacks, for each opponent we get to create a tapped token that's a copy of that exiled card, and it's also tapped and attacking that opponent. End of turn we will have to sacrifice it. So the Siegebreaker works exceptionally well with 3-drops that have powerful enter the battlefield abilities, since not only do we get to curve 3-drop into Siegebreaker and then make another copy each turn, but even if the Siegebreaker does end up getting removed or ends up trading for opposing creatures, then we'll still get that 3-drop back, re-triggering their enter the battlefield ability once again. So one of the creatures I wanted to combine with the Siegebreaker is the new Skirmish Rhino, which is like a baby version of Siege Rhino, a 3-mana 3/4 trampler. When it enters, each opponent loses 2 life and we gain 2 life. Of course, it does force us into a 4-color deck, but that's the cost of doing business. And then besides working very well with enter the battlefield abilities, the Siegebreaker also plays well with the prototype creatures, such as the Phyrexian Fleshgorger, which we can play as a 3-mana 3/3 with Menace and Lifelink, as well as a ward, making the opponents pay life if they want to target it. And then now if we curve a Fleshgorger into Siegebreaker, the tapped token is not going to be a 3/3, but rather a 7/5. And then once again, if the Siegebreaker were to leave the battlefield, we'll get a 7/5 Fleshgorger back, as opposed to the original 3/3, so that's quite the upgrade. Then we're also playing the new Severance Priest as a bit of hand disruption. 3/3 Death Touch. When it enters, can look at the opponent's hand, exiling a non-land card, and then when the priest leaves the battlefield, our opponent will get a spirit token in return, with the size scaling with the mana value of the exiled card. So it can be a little dangerous to exile very expensive cards with it, but especially in the best of 1 standard meta, the mana values tend to be pretty low if you're facing all those aggressive creature decks. And then we can also maybe exile it with our Siegebreaker to shred the opponent's hand apart, and then as long as we're not exiling very expensive spells, the opponent won't be able to block quite as well with those spirit tokens. And then rounding out our 3-drops, we've got another prototype creature with the Thresher, draws a card when it enters as a 1/1 double strike, can also maybe upgrade it into a 3/3 double strike that draws a card once again. And then there's Glissa Sunslayer, 3/3 first strike and Death Touch, very nice keywords to have on one creature, and then if it deals damage to the opponent, can also provide more value for us. And then speaking of First Strike and Death Touch, I'm also playing a one-off copy of Thalia and the Gidrock Monster, which is a 4/4 with First Strike and Death Touch, making opposing non-basics and creatures enter tapped. And then when Thalia and the Gidrock attack, we have to sacrifice a land or creature, so that can also maybe synergize with a Siegebreaker and just sacrifice the token that we're generating, since we can stack those triggers accordingly. And then we also get to draw additional cards with that effect, while also playing additional lands each turn if we just want to sacrifice our lands instead. And then another good creature to sack to Thalia and the Gidrock Monster is the Mosswood Dread Knight, which we can adventure to lose a life and draw a card, and then redeploy a 3/2 Trampler afterwards. Then we also have the 4 copies of Deep Cavern Bat to complement our discard plan with a Severance Priest, so maybe the Bat can focus on the more expensive spells, whereas a Priest can take the cheaper cards. And then we also have 2 copies of Duress, so we've got 10 discard spells total to hopefully give us a reasonable plan against combo and control decks. Then we've got a little bit of spot removal with 2 copies of Cut Down. Get Lost can also hit enchantments or planeswalkers and then go for the throat. A one-off Pest Control to deal with go-wide decks can also be a good answer to the tokens we might end up generating with our own Severance Priest, and we can always cycle it if it's a dead card. And then of course a mana base also needs a lot of attention in a 4-color build like this, and I've tried a few variations. I've tried the Surveil lands plus the Verge lands, ended up going with the Tri-lands instead, so we've got the Outpost and the Citadel in the Mardu and Abzan colors. These don't have any basic types, so they don't synergize too well with the Verge lands, so instead we're also playing Fabled Passage with one of each basic to search up, and then the Pain lands at least enter untapped later, so I've got a few of those to round things out, and a couple fast lands, especially the Abzan colors early, since we only need a red for the Siegebreaker on turn 4. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the play, and our hand is missing green for Skirmish Rhino. So, yeah, if we don't get there, this hand's kind of unexciting. If we do, then Bat into Rhino into Siegebreaker is excellent. Facing blue-black. Alright, now Flesh Gorger gives us a great 3-drop as well. So now we just need an untapped 4th land. Facing a, I guess, Esper tokens deck with lots of Mobilize. So triple Voice of Victory, probably no point in taking one of those. Can take Pack Beasts. Don't think we care about the talent, although eventually they can make their creatures unblockable with it. Although it's only one at a time, and it's a pretty big investment. So, sure, I'll take a 3-drop. Also, taking more expensive cards with a Bat is not a bad idea when our Severance Priest gives the opponent a larger token in return for more expensive spells. And we found the land we needed. So we've got our Dream Curve here. Flesh Gorger into Siegebreaker. Although Skirmish Rhino also would have been quite good. So there's the talents. No real attack here. But yeah, we're not going to hesitate. Exile Flesh Gorger, attack. Get a 7/5 Flesh Gorger in return. And even if they deal with a Siegebreaker, we would get a 7/5 Flesh Gorger back as opposed to the 3/3 version. So that's a lot to handle. Opponent now with a Storm Singer. So that can drain us with the Mobilized tokens dying. That's alright. They get to surveil a bunch. But yeah, just an all-out attack here, plus maybe a Skirmish Rhino should be good enough. See a Fleshcrafter in the graveyard. Okay, go ahead and attack. Opponent can chump, take 8, and then Skirmish Rhino will do the honors. For Xaxes. Alright, sweet, on to the next one. Alright, we're on the play. We've got a keepable hand. Just need to find red mana for Siegebreaker at some point. But in the meantime, get lost into Thresher. Can play a Priest as well. Yeah, let's see what we're working with. Alright, it is a red-white sort of tokens. And the Siege can make 1/1s each turn. We've got Tersa to discard and draw. Toby making a 4/4. Probably don't want to take something too expensive, otherwise their token will get bigger if they answer the Priest, and they can use Carnosaur to remove it. So we do have a Get Lost to answer their enchantment. So it's possible that Toby leaving behind a 4/4 is eventually going to be the most annoying. So our opponent's going to be tempted to use a Carnosaur. Plays a Light Shatter instead. Discarding 2 lands, that's a little surprising. Alright, still no red mana. But yeah, hit for 3, play Thresher, looks good. Opponent uses Carnosaur, Priest down, and get a 3/3. And we'll take 3. Alright, Glissa's not bad now that the Carnosaur's gone. Although might still want to be more efficient with Dread Knight, play Dread Knight. Or Thalia, which could also be fine. But I think we're looking for red mana, so I want to draw right now. Could also play a bat now. And see double inevitable defeat. Exile null and permanent, so lose 3, they gain 3. Yeah, that's pretty good. So taking one of those doesn't matter when they have a backup necessarily. Yeah, sure, I guess we'll take Beza. No attacks. So we are behind on board, and they do have 2 removal spells to answer my next few threats. But they're just gonna get rid of the bat. And then once they have 7 or more cards in graveyard, they get to play cards from their graveyard. Okay. Alright, there we go. So that can get our a red mana for Siegebreaker, if we want to run it out right now, that is. Could also take a different approach with maybe Glissa. Can get lost as well. Our opponent's going to be tempted to want to remove Glissa. We're also down to 4 in the meantime, because yeah, the life loss from defeat adds up. So we do have to be quite careful. If I go Siegebreaker attack, I leave myself quite vulnerable. So I might have to turtle up instead. And then, let's see, this Exile, so also pretty good against our Dread Knight. Yeah, I might just be dead here. If I play 2 blockers, they remove 1 attack, so I'm forced to jump. So I'm probably better off using the Get Lost. And then, to be mana efficient, I could play Thalia and the Gitrog, but that's also a juicy target. So yeah, not loving my spots. Not sure how we got down to 4 life, but here we are. So remove Glissa. Opponent attacks. I need to get lost and jump. Opponent can go exploring. And I need to find a Rhino to gain some life back, pretty much. Or a Flesh Gorger. Well, there's a Flesh Gorger, so I can play that alongside a Dread Knight, and then maybe next turn Siegebreaker can finally help us turn the corner. The extra counter also means this is no longer a trade. Our opponent finally plays the Siege. And, ooh, another hasty creature here. That's bad news. So I'm not gonna get to keep the Flesh Gorger alive. At least I can adventure the Dread Knight now. And then play Thalia and the Gitrog. Pest Control deals with their token. Might be better. And then I can still, let's see, yeah, play the Dread Knight afterwards. So we're trying to hang in there. I guess our opponent shows the extra trigger for a Light Shatter as opposed to making the tokens. Snail exiles a card from my hand. At this point, we actually prefer Thalia and the Gitrog, perhaps. I mean, it really depends whether or not we draw another Flesh Gorger soon. Thalia and the Gitrog blocks pretty well. And then can also play well with the Dread Knight, although we only have 3 life to play with. Yeah, maybe we just have to hope to get lucky and top deck Fleshgorger, but I'll keep Thalia. And now Beza. Just a 4-5. So Thalia can block Beza profitably. Another siege. This one probably making the tokens. And a duress. I may as well cast it, but unlikely to do much here. Alright, never mind. Our opponent had an assault left in hand. Would have been pretty powerful. So if Thalia attacks, I leave myself vulnerable to Beza. At least their tokens enter tapped. So we don't have to worry about 1-1. And then if I sack the Dread Knight, I get to replay it, and that can jump once again. So I think I go for it here just to try and find more action. And Fleshgorger is exactly what we were hoping for. So I can play it for 7. So if we can fade a top deck here, we might be able to turn the corner. And we were all the way down to 1 life. And we found a Siegebreaker, although right now just attacking with Fleshgorger is good too. So I can Adventure Dread Knight to replay it. Let's start here. Find a land, can also play an extra land with Thalia. Can play it. Attack with both sacking Dread Knight again. We'll gain 7. And then I can once again Adventure Dread Knight and play it. Might have been a little risky in the face of another removal spell here. If they exile the Dread Knight and attack while dealing 3. It's gonna be their own Siegebreaker. Okay. Does enter tapped, so it doesn't get to attack here. So yeah, Thalia's putting in some work. Exiles Beza. So don't need to do anything in response. And draw a bat. Alright, so what's our best play here? Could use Siegebreaker on like a Deep Cavern bat if we want that to attack. At this point Thalia can also start sacking lands. So let's say they double block Fleshgorger. Yeah, then Siegebreaker should just do it here. Play bats. GG's. Attack all out. And then I could also sacrifice the bat to Thalia and the Gitrog monster, but our opponent would be taking lethal regardless. And another Siegebreaker. Yeah, at some point could have also exiled the Fleshgorger instead. Sweet, I'll do the next one. Okay, we're on the play. We have what looks like a functional hand. Wouldn't be able to get Mountain unless we draw another lands, because then I wouldn't be able to play my Priest on curve. But maybe Swamp, so we have double black for Fleshgorger, makes sense. Facing red-black. Alright, can have a look with duress before deciding. And we're also up against a Siegebreaker build with Fortune double cut down. So cut down, it's not gonna hit much. Besides our deep cavern bats, maybe. I'll get swamp. And then we can play Severance Priest. How much do we care about Fortune? Does potentially set up other Flicker synergies. Yeah, I think Siegebreaker's still scarier, and then we'll have Get Lost for another one. But they will now get a 4/4 token out of it, potentially. So then we are looking at Flash Gorger. Try and keep up the pressure a little bit. At least our 3/3 Death Touch attacks into a 2/4 reasonably well. But the Scry 2 could find more cards to synergize with the Siegebreaker, I suppose. Alright, another Flesh Gorger. So, do we want to attack? Not necessarily. Can just play Flesh Gorger and pass. In case they do end up saddling with Fortune. So we are still missing our red mana in case we top deck our own Siegebreaker. And yeah, they've got the Flesh Gorger as well. So we need to keep up Get Lost. Although our opponent gets to flicker the Flesh Gorger as well. So that was not ideal. So I guess now what we're maybe gonna try and set up is Get Lost to Flesh Gorger in response to Siegebreaker entering. This can still attack. Could have also attacked with the Priest since it doesn't block the Flesh Gorger by itself. But yeah, I think I want to do this now. So there's still a Siegebreaker in hand. And they're going to hang on to it until they can set it up a little bit better. Alright, so this turn I get to attack. And then probably want to double spell, draw with Dread Knight, maybe draw with Thresher, or play another Flesh Gorger. Alright, go for the throat to get back a 4/4 token. But our creature has Menace. And then I can start by drawing here. Find the bats. Dice to cut down, so not the best right now. So then I'll maybe go for Thresher over Flesh Gorger, although Flesh Gorger can attack past the token, which might be worthwhile. And we're still pretty far from a 7 mana Flesh Gorger. So Siegebreaker enters. Just 4/4 haste Death Touch, playing defense now. And we found our own Siegebreaker, which I can now cast. So that seems pretty good here. Exile Flesh Gorger, attack, they can trade, but we'll get some damage out of it. So, yeah, I don't think we're sending in Flesh Gorger, or do we? I guess, yeah, if they double block here, then Siegebreaker lives. That's gonna be worthwhile. So then we get in for 10, get a 7/5 Flesh Gorger back, which they cannot target with Ward. So we're pretty far ahead. But yeah, you can definitely pick up some inspiration for this deck. Fortune, a card I considered as well. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw with a fine hand. Got our mana sorted. And then we can decide between a turn 2 Bat or a turn 3, maybe Priest or Fleshgorger. Facing a Fabled Passage. So a Teamer deck, and looks like a ramp deck. So the hand disruption is going to be pretty vital. Do we Priest, or do we just play the Bat now, but then next turn I might not have a play? So I think I do try and set up the Priest first. Even though they might get to cast a scary 4-drop. It's going to be the Bloomvine Regent. Essentially cultivating here. Alright, so let's see what they're working with as we draw a third Fleshgorger. Alright, so the Exhale can deal 4 damage, and then the Assault is what we probably need to get rid of. Since they could cast it next turn already. But that means that now the Exhale dealing with a Priest leaves them with a 6/6 creature that we would have to Get Lost, I guess. Could have also used Get Lost on the enchantment. So there's a few ways we could have played it. For now, play Thalia and the Gitrog monster, since it can just hold off the 6/6. And maybe next turn we can double spell. Alright, Magmatic Hellkite's pretty good. Although we do have some basics we can find. So here I probably need to get, let's see, if I get Swamp, I'll eventually be able to play Fleshgorger. If I get red, I'll eventually be able to play Siegebreaker, which I guess is the goal, but yeah, without a Fleshgorger in play, we're not doing much. Could also make the argument that if I find Fabled Passage, I want Swamp left in my deck so I can actually search it up here. But I'll still get the Swamp. And the Iron Crag. So there's nothing left to take with the Deep Cavern Bat that we care about. So then I could sacrifice it to Thalia and the Gitrog monster. Just so I get a card deeper. Which might be worthwhile. And then attack. Alright, so we get to play 2 lands this turn. And then next turn, with a land I could play a 7 mana Fleshgorger as well. Although most likely gonna double spell with a Get Lost. Take 10. Comet Thresher's not bad either. Could also keep Thalia back, and then we just need to deal with the Hellkite. And then might want to get the Fleshgorger going over the Thresher. We'll just play Fleshgorger and pass. Go to attackers, Hellkite attacks. I'll Get Lost it. And then they get to explore here. And drawing into more lands. Would have been 2 turns of poor top decks otherwise. Alright, so we know their entire hands. The Bat we could once again sacrifice to Thalia if we decide to attack. And then we can start getting life back with the Fleshgorger. Maybe start with playing Comet Thresher, see what we pick up. A land. So could also sacrifice a land now. And just play another Fleshgorger, or we could set up a 7 mana Fleshgorger for next turn. And here, sacrifice like a Deep Cavern Bat, which I also don't mind. And then we can go back to back 7 mana Flesh Gorgers. Don't have to attack with Thalia, could keep it back to block. Sure, we'll play it safe. Although it's possible they top deck another Assault and then we're gonna lose most of our board. It's gonna be the Regent, just a 4/5 flyer entering tapped. Okay, so probably gonna play the Flesh Gorger now. And we'll sack the bat, I think. Finding a Get Lost. Don't have many basic lines left. Thresher can jump if needed. But it looks like we got there. Alright, GG's, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. We only have 2 lands, but we can draw with Dread Knight and Thresher. So we might still be able to draw out of it here. Facing a dragon deck. Finding red mana is good too. And Priest is maybe the play next turn. So for now, play or draw with Dread Knight. If we're up against a dragon deck, their late game might overpower ours, so then we need to find better tools to fight him with. The Rhino's not bad either. And Overlord, so yeah, they are ramping. Duress would have been useful earlier. Could still cast it, but then I guess we don't get to Get Lost since we only have the 1 black-white land. So maybe we play Glissa, hope it doesn't get removed, since we're unable to play the Priest right now. Or we could play Dread Knight and Duress. Yeah, maybe I should check out if Glissa can actually survive first. Well, that's a lot of Dragonstorms. I'll take one. So we know what our opponent is doing. So they get to randomly find a card here, but it's likely something juicy as they hit another Overlord. Alright, so now we could try Glissa. And hope that they don't hit something too crazy. Terror, pick up Dragonstorm. Okay, so Glissa gets to attack and destroy the Overlords, and then Get Lost can deal with the Terror at the very least. Could also Priest, but they have double Dragonstorm in hand, so I don't feel like that's gonna make a difference. Opponent blocks, may as well. And then, yeah, probably need to answer the Terror. Could also try my luck with card draw of Thresher, hope to draw an untapped white source, but that's going to be very specific. And yeah, if they play a Dragonstorm and hit a creature, then Terror could finish off Glissa, which is probably something we want to avoid. So I'll just do this now. Alright, let's see what they hit. Another Terror. Pick up the Dragonstorm again. And they can go exploring, so yeah, we're not really making any forward progress. At least Glissa deals with the Overlord once again. Could also consider sending in the Dread Knight just so I can draw with it. But yeah, there's no one draw that really solves this issue. I guess dealing with the terror would be a good starting point. They're still jumping Glissa. So then it might be Thresher, hope to draw another Get Lost or go for the throats. Alright, I'll play the tap land. Now another dragon. Can finally finish off Glissa. And destroys our artifact as well. Deep Cavern Bat, alright, so now with Priest and Bat we could take both Dragonstorms, although we're still facing 8 in the air is the problem. But I guess we'll start somewhere. Opponent takes the trade. Don't mind seeing that. So we'll start with Bat. So we can take the other Storm, although any creature that triggers Terror is still problematic here. And then Dread Knight goes to waste. Alright, so Dracogenesis, so they can play their dragons for free. Take 5. And a Siegebreaker, alright. Does that do anything for me? A little bit short of combining it with a Skirmish Rhino, which is really what we're hoping for. So in that case we probably set up Flesh Gorger. Could play Flesh Gorger and then still Skirmish Rhino. Although I guess I'll lose one from my Pain Land. Could also draw with Dread Knight, but that also costs us 1 life, and when Terror deals 5, that's pretty sketchy. So, yeah, lots to consider. Maybe Flesh Gorger plus Rhino is still the safest here, and let go of the Dread Knight. And then next turn, if we get to survive and play Siegebreaker, that would put us in a pretty good spot. So, Flesh Gorger into Rhino. And of course, they could also just win the game now if they draw a creature for Terror. Opponent's fetching. And yeah, that's a creature, so that's game over here. Opponent's still getting their enchantment back. They could have attacked for lethal. Now I'm not sure if it's guaranteed. Another Dragonstorm. And a Beanstalk, so now it's a random draw. Alright, they drew another Terror of the Peaks. So yeah, we're super dead now. But yeah, if that Beanstalk drew into a land, then we actually get to untap and maybe Siegebreaker can save the day. But now our opponent's got all the damage they'll ever need. Alright, GG's. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. We have a lot of disruption, no threats, which is not really the type of hand we can keep. This is better. So then, Flesh Gorger into Siegebreaker is a dream. Can Dread Knight on 2 even. So maybe hit our land drops. Facing a red-white tokens deck. Okay, I'll draw with the Dread Knights. Found a land, so we can curve out here. Opponent's playing blue as well. So now the question is our opponent just keeping up some 2-mana token maker at instant speed, or do they have a counter spell we need to worry about? I think I still try Flesh Gorger since the upside's so high if it works. But otherwise we could check out their hand first with a Priest. Alright, opponent's just sacking the clue. So as long as they don't remove the Flesh Gorger, we're looking at a pretty sweet turn. It's going to be a Scoundrel. Making a treasure. And our opponent passes. Well, I gotta try. And we get maybe a Plains here. That resolves. Target Flesh Gorger. And smash. And there it is. 7/5 Menace, Lifelink. Opponent double blocks. And now even if they remove our Siegebreaker, we'll get a Flesh Gorger right back. So yeah, it doesn't get much better on the play with our turn 4 Siegebreaker. If we were up against a deck with interaction, we could have kind of played it slow by deploying the Priest first. As our opponent's gonna rediscover to find additional cards. And then 2 mana left. I have seen this used alongside This Town Ain't Big Enough, since they can bounce the Saga and then kind of redeploy it. So that's potentially what they're sitting on. Either way, I think Priest makes sense. Possible they have something that can remove an attacking creature, so playing it pre-combat makes sense. Alright, opponent just has lots of 3-mana cards and a Scroll Shift. So, can attack, hit them for 11, still play a Dread Knight. And that should be pretty much game. So their opponent trying to go off with a Grappler to copy their spells. And the Dragonologist. And they found another Scoundrel. And a Grappler. Yeah, normally want to play that one first, but they didn't have a real choice here. Alright, GG's. Can go ahead and attack. Could also play another Siegebreaker first, but they should be dead regardless. First Strike is a pretty useful keyword. Would line up pretty well against our Priest. But there we have it. Alright, so we get to see our 4-color Siegebreaker deck in action. And yeah, this deck can have some very powerful curve-out draws, especially if the Flesh Gorger is involved. But it is also a deck that's playing 4 colors, so you will have to contend with a lot of tapped lands. Sometimes you might be missing a color, so then things won't go as smoothly. And then of course the opponent is also allowed to interact with your creatures, and this is at the end of the day a creature deck, so it's not too difficult for most decks to blow up some of your synergies. Just answering the Priest and the Deep Cavern Bat will give the opponent their cards back or generate some tokens on the ground to get in the way. So it doesn't take much removal to disrupt this deck, so I don't think it's going to be particularly competitive in this standard going forward, but there are definitely some powerful creatures here that are worth looking at. So yeah, that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.